you can go ahead and start.
Okay. So I'm just presenting on the end of chapter 1 and looking at the wrapping up like evolutionary and the biological aspect of fat talk. And so in chapter 1, like one of the first research experiments that were presented was a research experiment with looking at 3 vignettes of Jessica and Michael. And in this like experiment, they had Michael, who did not change, but Jessica was participating in self-accepting talk, a minimal level of fat talk, and excessive levels of fat talk. And in this, people were asked to rate Jessica on like how much they liked her, and she was most liked when she engaged in self-acceptance. She was a little less liked in the minimal levels of fat talk, and then like least liked when she engaged in excessive levels of fat talk. And so one of the things that was a big conversation in the end part of chapter 1 was what are some of the ways that excessive levels of fat talk can harm us, and how does it change the different perceptions that people have of us? So if you guys want to jump in.
I think a lot of times when we fat talk, especially if we consider ourselves a feminist, we kind of feel that like shame and guilt around participating in fat talk because it's like, well, I know I shouldn't do it, but it's kind of ingrained in us to do it anyways. So that can be very harmful. So yeah.
Yeah, so like how can that like affect our relationships? I know that some of us, like all of us, read about it in chapter 1, but what do you guys think, and how it can like affect our relationships with women, but even our intimate relationships?
It's expected in female relationships, but it sounds like we don't know if we don't think it's expected in male-female relationships. And in fact, we think it might be harmful in excessive levels. Emma, you were about to say something?
Well, with female relationships, I was going to say if you don't want to participate in fat talk, but one of your friends is, you might not want to spend more time with her if she's constantly fat talking and encouraging you to. And then if you're like in a romantic relationship, a like heterosexual relationship, then the man might not like you constantly bringing yourself down if it's excessive. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that Dr. Martz mentioned in her book is that a lot of people can relate excessive amounts of fat talk with like poor body image, and it's something that we've already talked about in this class. And the idea of like poor body image can also relate to like sexual relationships, and the fact that people may not be as comfortable with their own body, and especially in an intimate relationship of not being as and being able to basically enjoy it and get into that intimate level with a person. And one thing that Dr. Martz found is that men do not always find this connection. They think that if a woman is having sex, then they're obviously enjoying it. And all of us kind of know that that's not always true. And so one of the things that they decided to research beyond just that vignette was looking at how do people perceive fat talk and sexual relationship and intimate relationships, and like the satisfaction in sexual relationships. And so they went and used the same vignettes and got participants with long-term relationship experience, because they found that oftentimes both males and females with long-term relationship experience can start connect those things that maybe people who don't have long-term relationships can't, especially men. And they found that between the different conditions, when Jessica experienced or participated in excessive amounts of fat talk, people and the participants saw that she probably had the least amount of sexual pleasure. And when she participated in self-acceptance, they found that she probably had the most sexual pleasure. However, one thing that they did find is that there was not a significant difference between the minimal amounts of fat talk and the acceptance, like um, participating in self-acceptance. And so do you guys know why there wasn't a significant difference between like the idea of Jessica's sexual pleasure and when she participated in self-acceptance versus like minimal levels of fat talk? So like why would like at least like both men and women would not see a difference between those two conditions? Sophie, we can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Sophie.
Oh my goodness. I have Wi-Fi this time, so I don't know what. Are we good now?
Yeah.
But I think, just because it's normal, and so those like normalized, it's not, doesn't make it right, but just having those normal levels of like fat talk and how normalized it is in our culture, that's kind of, the same as being, positive, that positive self-talk versus the excessive is, not as normal talking about it excessively. That would be my guess. So.
That's something that I definitely thought about, is that our society expects women to be humble. And so minimal levels of fat talk is very accepted. But then also with the humility expectation, I felt like those like interplayed. And so people who saw women participating in minimal levels didn't see it largely affecting her sexual pleasure, versus like excessive levels would increase poor body image. Another thing is, and it's just like societal expectations on us, is one of the things that Dr. Martz talked about in the book is that minimal levels of fat talk could actually be encouraged, because it means that women care about how they look, and men like when women care about how they look. And so therefore like that minimal level is just like a care about how you look and wanting to look as acceptable way, I guess, in society's viewpoint. And so therefore, like people didn't see a big difference between the two. Any other comments on that?
The flip side of this, it's making me wonder when people post selfies that show off their body. I wonder, I mean, I know that gets perceived sexually, obviously, and I just find it to be kind of amusing that people do this. But it makes me wonder how much of it is signaling I'm comfortable in my body, therefore I would be comfortable in bed.
I've found that a lot of my friends who are more insecure, they flaunt their bodies way more, which I think is really interesting. Yeah.
Sarah, do you think they're looking for reassurance? Do you
Oh,
think?
absolutely. Absolutely.
We did it.
Sarah, sorry. No, I was gonna say my friends do the same. Like, some of my friends like who are like the most insecure definitely take more time to show off their bodies, and it's definitely, I think, for validation or reassurance. And it's just like I feel for them, because like having those insecurities and wanting to just like have some sort of like just like someone to say like, no, like it's okay, like you're fine, like just how you are. Like it makes me feel for them that they feel like that they don't. I don't know if like I said that very well, but I just wanted to say like my friends are the same.
Yeah,
someone.
it makes me wonder if the postings of the pictures, it's like a different form of fat talk because it is seeking reassurance at times. We did an Instagram study that we never got published because we had some results, but not great results years ago. But one of my favorite questions of some of the pictures that we were rating was, would you want your grandmother to see this picture? Because a lot of times you'd be like, oh no. Any other thoughts, comments?
I would definitely agree with them. The people who are more insecure in my life definitely post more, and sometimes more provocative. I think it depends on the person on how they handle that. But a lot of people who are seeking reassurance, and maybe it's just a different form of fat talk, but definitely use social media more for that reassurance from others.
We called it body narcissism. And narcissism is a showing off, but it's usually born out of insecurity. It's a showing off out of insecurity to try to get reassurance. So I thought that was kind of a fitting term for what we thought we were viewing in all these different Instagram selfie kind of things. Yeah.
Anything else on that? Okay. So then to follow that up, one of the really interesting studies that I found in the last end of chapter 1 was the study on the 3 popular maxims. And these 3 were like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, beauty is only skin deep, and don't judge a book by its cover. I'm sure all of us have heard these and maybe even said to us at some point. And so I thought this would be a really good conversation starter on talking about what we think of these and then looking at the results. So what do you think when you think, like, do you think that beauty is in the eye of the beholder from like personal experience and from like observing others, like not thinking of the results? Like, what were your initial thoughts when you saw this like popular maximum?
I believed it before I read the research on it.
I think that it's really interesting because, I mean, there have been studies out there where certain people are just attracted to like different features on someone, like people who are attracted to like tanner, like darker features with like darker hair colors and darker eyes might not find someone who's like the exact opposite as attractive as they would someone the other way. So it has nothing to like judge with someone's beauty on how they look on the outside. But I think it's like also hard because a lot of people, you know, like there's a trend sometimes where like if you're not blonde, then, you know, like blondes are the best and stuff like that. It's harder because there's other people who don't like find that attractive, but they're not like, I don't know if I'm saying, but they're not like calling that person not attractive. It's just not what they find attractive, if that makes sense.
I do think there's a little bit of a difference between the commonality in people being able to view other people and rate them with pretty good consensus on what they would consider to be their level of attractiveness versus I personally am not attracted to that. Right. Like I think of like Brad Pitt. I mean, people find him apparently to be quite attractive, and I guess he is, but to me, not so much. You know, I've got other boy celebrity crushes as an example. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the study studied universal attractiveness, and I think all of us can identify universal attractiveness, even if it's not something that we may pursue. And that was like my critique on that study is like they definitely tested the cultural norm, and I feel like the cultural norm may be slightly different than individual norms on like who we choose, why we choose them, because I know that not all of us, we obviously don't choose people just based off of looks anyways. And then for me, at least, someone's personality definitely adds to their attractiveness, or can take away depending on how that works. And so do you guys have any thoughts or anything about that relating to this?
Kind of what you just said about personality, like I'm definitely drawn to like personalities, but I think I agree with you when you say there's like a universal like attractiveness, like we can all acknowledge like something or someone that is attractive. But where was I going with this? Like it was about personality. I literally just lost my train of thought. Maybe I'll like come back to it. I'm so sorry.
Well, and Jamin, doesn't the evolutionary psychology suggest that women look beyond just physical attractiveness because there's so many other things? I think this is what you were getting at, Celeste, is that there's so many other things that are important when you think about potential mate, partner, and potential children, right?
That just brought it back. Basically like the personality is like you could find someone's personality to be more attractive than they may actually be to someone else, if that makes sense. So like someone could be like, they're not attractive or whatever, and you're like, but they're great. Like if it's, there's like a balance with that. I don't know. That's kind of what I was getting at with what you just said.
Oh,
We can't yet.
are we good now? I don't
Yeah.
know. It's like a lagging thing. But I was just gonna add that, like, yes, you know, the personality makes a huge difference, and you're not just gonna completely base off of personality, like who you're dating or whatever. But at first you are. Like, you don't go up to someone that you don't find attractive and see if their personality matches with like what you're looking for, you know? So I just want to say that, like, we are biased, you know, in that at first, at least, you know, and that's like the major like role in, you know, choosing someone first is, you know, looking at their attractiveness. Because if you're, you know, say in a bar and you're going to pick someone up, you're not going to walk up to someone that you perceive as not attractive, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, I just wanted to like add that just on the flip side of things too.
Yeah, I think that's kind of some of the aspects of human behavior we don't like to own up to. So thank you for mentioning that. But I mean, I think about like, and I've never played with Tinder. I know a couple that got married because they met on Tinder, but you know, isn't the swipey thing just the ultimate evolutionary psychology?
I was also going to mention, I think it depends on how you met that person. Because I think there's definitely times in modern dating or dating in general where you walk up to people because of their physical attractiveness. And so like that would be like bars and dating apps. But then there are times where you become friends with someone just because how you met them. And then like later on down the road, something like clicks, and it may not be instant. I know that the person I'm dating right now, I knew for 4 years before we started dating. And so like, there was a transition period of like, oh, we're not friends anymore, we're dating. And so I think it also depends on when you meet someone and like why you come up to them and like when the pieces fall together too. Any other thoughts or comments on beauty is in the eye of the beholder and that idea? Okay. So the results of the study were that in a correlation of 0.9, which it can only go up to 1, adults agreed on what they found beautiful. And then children also agreed on what they found attractive by 0.85. And then I found it really interesting that across ethnicities and across culturally, there's also very strong correlation of agreement on like what is attractive among people who were in the study. Do you guys have any thoughts about this?
I think the cross-cultural aspect is fascinating. You know, that's got to be genetic. Particularly if you have not been exposed to those different looking individuals, that we're honing in on something, aren't we? You know, yeah.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I don't know why it's lagging, but I remember hearing either like doing research, or honestly it might have been from Criminal Minds. There was this one episode that they talked about how you find people physically attractive, and if you look at their faces, like the breakdown of it, they're very symmetrical. And so I think that that's kind of interesting and might, you know, play a role in across like cultures and stuff. You know, it's not as much skin tones or like hair color or anything like that you find attractive. It's just the symmetry of someone's face. So I don't know, I thought that was kind of interesting to learn about. So
I can add to that because I don't think I wrote about that in the chapter, but in some of the evolutionary psychology stuff, it has to do with at the time we think in human evolution, there were a lot of parasites. And so if the parasites got a hold of the right side of your face, as an example, you might be deformed on that side of the face. And so there wasn't symmetry. And so it was a signal to other people that you were diseased. And so the more symmetrical, and then there's even some kind of golden formula, mathematical formula that we tend to find most attractive, not only in the symmetry, but in the shape of faces, which is crazy, and cross-cultural and universal. Yeah. Anybody in here have parasites on your face? Good.
I definitely think it plays a role, and I actually chose a video to show that kind of hits more onto that and the idea of physical attractiveness. And so this is just like a piece of the video, and let me make sure that I'm sharing my sound. Tell me if it's too loud.
Another thing that is thought to be universally attractive is averageness. And for me, this kind of goes against the assumption that I had that unique traits would be considered to be the most attractive. But it turns out that that's incorrect, and I think that this is beautifully illustrated in these figures that were created by Judy Langlois. And one thing that she studies is attractiveness as it relates to averageness. And the way that she does this is by studying what she refers to as face morphs. So what you're seeing here in this top figure are pictures of Caucasian female faces that have been digitized and then averaged. So in this figure, 2 separate Caucasian female faces have been overlaid and their features morphed together. This one includes 4 faces, 8 faces, 16 faces, and 32 faces. And I want you to take your moment yourself to look at these 5 images and to pick out which one you consider to be the most attractive. It turns out that most respondents picked the 32 face average as being the most attractive in the set. And this seems to imply that the closer someone's face is to the average face, the more attractive we would perceive them to be. And at this point, you might be thinking, no, I don't think that that's true. Because what the average face looks like is completely dependent on which faces you average. And in response to that, I have this bottom figure. And what you're seeing here is the result of the same face morphing technology that we saw in the top figure. In this case, 32 faces have been averaged to create one single image. But the 32 faces that were averaged in this face are completely different than the 32 faces that went into this face. So each of these 5 faces include the faces of 32 individual women with no overlap. And one thing that you might notice right away is that they are all incredibly similar. And if you stare at them for a little bit, if you really concentrate on them, the differences between them will start popping out. But overall, these faces are incredibly similar to each other. And so when we say that the closer women's faces to the average or prototypical face, the more attractive they are, there does actually seem to be a fairly stable prototype that we're comparing these faces to. But even while things like...
Wow.
So that's like a short little clip on like observing that, and I found it very fascinating. But any thoughts on the averageness of a face or symmetrical?
So when a significant other asks, do I look good today, or how do I look, you can say very average. Woo. I think it's amazing that, I mean, the bottom line, they look like identical twins, didn't they? I mean, it would take a long time to be able to tell them apart, you know?
I found that the 32 faces average for me, definitely I found the most attractive, but also I like unique features on individuals. So I don't really know where I fall and like where I think people are attractive, but I love seeing unique looking individuals. I think they're beautiful. So
if we had the technology in our department, which we don't, we could morph our class and just see what we look like.
Any other thoughts on that? On like the averageness, symmetrical, like in your own experience, did you find pretty average faces the most attractive?
Doesn't it make a little sense though that we didn't just evolve like in North Carolina or Virginia, we evolved all over the world. And isn't it interesting that the most robust genes, when they do that computer average, that's basically what they're doing, is they're kind of taking genetic structures from all over the world and averaging them together. And so we may be attracted and like unique features, but sometimes unique features mean you've got genetic mutations that potentially could not be robust enough for survival, right? When you think about like human deformities that occur as an example. Yeah, other thoughts or feelings about this stuff?
Last semester I took a personality psych class, and we talked a little bit about like facial features or like the way that someone looks based on like the big 5 personality traits. Like if someone looks like more conscientious or if someone looks like more outgoing and that kind of thing. And I'm curious if you like combine the two with like attractiveness, how that would be for people, because it's more based on personality. So would facial features that may or may not be based on like personality or like the way that someone looks or their facial expressions would affect attractiveness? Just curious. I don't have an answer for it, but
Vivian, I have a question for you. Were the studies that you all talked about in personality, were they static pictures or were they people moving and interacting and speaking?
they were static pictures, and they were the same idea of like morphed faces. So you'd have like a 1 through 5, and then one side of the scale would be like conscientious, and then the other side of the scale would be like more outgoing, and then you'd have like the middle like 3 that would be like transitioning to the other one.
So we can even read people's big 5 just by looking at them to a certain extent. Wow. Doesn't it make some sense? I mean, I don't like this because it's an explanation. It's definitely an explanation for racism as an example, but doesn't it make some sense that we have evolved to very quickly look at somebody and attempt to size them up? And really what we're getting at when you think about evolutionary threats, we look at somebody and we go, are you okay? And am I going to be safe around you? Or are you a threat and are you dangerous to me? Right? So some of the racism and the sexism stuff is the potential, the thought that if this person is different enough from me, they could be a threat. But if they're similar to me, they're going to be safer. Does that make some sense? Again, it's one of those things I don't like, but the literature suggests that.
Yeah, I think it depends on personalities and stuff. I am interested to know if you combine facial expressions with like different symmetrical faces, like how people would rate the attractiveness. I think it would go to societal norms, whichever those societal norms are. So maybe for here, people would rather have like a smiling, outgoing woman because like that's very much the expectations on us, versus like someone who isn't smiling and more maybe reserved. I don't know what you guys think about on that.
You're kind of getting at, Jama, first impressions, and particularly for things like a job interview, you'd want to, or or you're meeting somebody who potentially might be interested in dating. You want to make a first impression, but kind of knowing yourself and knowing maybe what you need to do a little less of, a little more of. Knowing that is happening, right? It's kind of scary. That's what makes us nervous, right? When we do those kinds of things. Real quickly, I want to tell you about research on teaching evaluations. This is scary. But there's research where they do a 10-second clip and videotape different professors on their first day of class. And that 10-second clip, when they have people rate that clip, very accurately predicts end of semester teaching evaluations. And that's just an example of like how strong that first impression is, right? And scary in my shoes, that kind of stuff of like, whoa, boy, better wear nice clothes on that first day. Other thoughts, opinions on this stuff? How do you all feel knowing about how quickly we make those first impressions? Even if we would like to think we don't. that we give people a chance.
I know I overthink it a lot. Like, I don't know if anyone else does, but sometimes I'll leave like a situation wherever I meet somebody for the first time or whatever kind of situation. Sometimes I'll go back to wherever after and just be like, what did they think? Or like start just running thoughts through my head. Like, how was I? Like, what did they think of me? Was that weird? Like, just all those little things. So it's just like, I don't know. I worry, but at the same time, like, I'm working on that. Just like, because I don't go in with like, I don't personally like judge someone super harshly the first time, because like it's hard for some people to open up and whatnot. So it's just like, I have to understand that I'm usually an open book and like, which is like, it's fine, but I know others aren't. So it's just like having an understanding that like, we're all just different. We're all trying.
And I think we want to believe that when we meet someone, we kind of have like a whole idea of them, but we can be like wrong a lot. And we have to kind of like accept that. That makes sense.
What do you all think of when people express? I attended this thing called Sustained Dialogue, and it was like a 2-day training, but I found this part to be really interesting. When people say, I don't see color. Meaning I don't see color in others.
I think it denies people a part of their identity. So I don't really like that saying that much.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my dad about this because he was saying that, and he was meaning well. He was meaning to say, I'm trying not to be racist, or I'm not racist, right? But my response back to him is like, Dad, what if I said, I don't see that you're a man? You could be a man or a woman or non-binary. And he was like, but I'm a man. Like, yeah, that's an important part of your identity. Doesn't it make sense that a person of color, that's a very important part of their identity? Other thoughts on that? Have y'all heard people say that? Have you heard them mean well? Do you think the intent is well-meaning, even though it can be quite offensive? Other thoughts on this?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think that a lot of times people make statements like that and the intention is good, but it like, I don't think it's enough for the intention to be good. So like, I think it's interesting that we like talk about statements like that, because there has to be like a certain level of education that needs to be done. Because even if you're meaning well, like you can still really hurt somebody, I think.
Do you think, and I know I was raised by my parents, that when I left the house, I was expected to be dressed a certain way, coiffed a certain way, as opposed to just leaving the house in, I don't know, my running shorts and no makeup and hair in a ponytail kind of thing. Do you think some of knowing that first impression aspect that's one of the things that women get socialized to kind of compromise for, sort of knowing that other people are going to see you and make a very quick impression? Or all the doctoring up of the selfies that people are posting, the filters and that kind of stuff? You think these are the evolutionary forces that go into some of that?
I always like find this really interesting. I had a conversation with one of my best friends back in high school about something like this, and my best friend, she's Nigerian, so she comes from a family of like doctors. Like they're all very like well-known people, and she would always come to school dressed, like 7 o'clock in the morning. She would have her hair done, her makeup done, like she would look so put together the entire high school. And then I would show up in like sweatpants and leggings and like my hair thrown in a bun because I would love to grab those last 15 minutes of sleep. And I always asked her, like, how much time does it take for you to get ready in the morning? Like, why do you put so much time every single day into the way you look? And then you complain about how tired you are all day. And she always said that her parents said that like where they come from, I guess like cross-culturally, and there are other people who do this too, but for them, they always see as like meeting someone an opportunity for like growth in some aspect, like whether it could be your career or it could be just someone on the street. Like she ended up going to Chapel Hill and she still does it there. And her professors always loved that because she came to class like put together and took class seriously versus like other people who kind of just like rolled out of bed. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting how like people view opportunities differently. Like when I leave the house, I feel like I'm not really going to run into anybody. Like that's too important. That's going to affect my career later. Whereas her, she thinks that what if you were to run into the president at like Walmart? Like what if she looks at every opportunity like that when she leaves the house? So I think that's interesting.
Do you think women feel this pressure more than men? And the answer is yes. Do you think minority or underrepresented groups feel more pressure than, say, more dominant groups in our society?
I definitely think so.
Yeah, when Alea said she was Nigerian, it got me kind of thinking about that. Is there even more pressure for, say, a person of color to look a certain way, as opposed to the roll out of bed, go do your thing, where some people could make an impression, not for us when we roll out of bed and do a certain thing, but making the impression of like, oh, they're kind of lazy, or they're not conscientious enough, or what else? Like what other stereotypes might we place on that?
I don't mean to like bring my friend back into the conversation again, but something that her parents always pressured, like another reason why she had to look successful, is that she had to go to school to be a doctor. Like there was no other, she ended up fighting that stereotype and going into communications and becoming a social media person, but her parents like wanted her to do medical. Like they would always pressure her growing up that like we left our country, like we left where we were coming from to make something of ourselves. And since you're the first generation in our family, you have to be successful. And the only way to be successful is in medical. So she always kind of had that like pressure on herself. Whereas my family, they're kind of more like free, and they're like, we want you to do what makes you happy. Like if you want to do, like you want to go study abroad for a year, like that won't affect us in any way. But her parents were like strict, like you have to become a doctor so you can take care of us when we get older, you can take care of other people that are in our family in the other countries and things like that. So there's definitely a lot more stress for, at least like I know her versus me.
Yeah, I've heard some of that expressed in my advisees, and even in, I've got somebody in mind, a previous honor student of mine. I've heard about those kinds of pressures of like, make us proud. And interestingly, you brought up the doctor piece to it. I just read an article last night because I was looking at first generation doctoral students. And one of the things that they suggested is a lot of time parents of underrepresented first gen students have these expectations for what they think will be success. And a lot of times it is medical doctor, or it's something like accountant. It's like these professions that they know of that make money and have status and are going to breed success for my kid, and then maybe send money back and be, you know, add some success for the family. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of times when underrepresented groups want to go into graduate school in psychology, they oftentimes have parents that absolutely don't understand that. They were like, why would you do that? It's just talking to people. Or why would you do that? They don't make, and this is true. Psychologists do not make as much money as medical doctors. That's very true. So we're like, why would you go and spend all those years in school to do that kind of thing? And so I hear a lot of students of underrepresented groups feeling like, okay, my parents want me to be this one thing, and there's not that kind of flexibility to explore and kind of find your fit. Has anybody else kind of heard about that or felt that?
Kind of a different branch of that. I know I'm a first generation college student, so none of my like family or extended family has really like gotten higher education after high school. So I know in that sense, like being that person in my family, it was never a question, like, are you going to college? It was always like, you're gonna go to college and you're gonna get this degree. It was like, it was never really a question. Being able to like choose my own degree was a pretty like big deal, but I could definitely see how like that amplified, especially in minority groups, could be like detrimental in expectations, I think.
I found it fascinating when I was in graduate school. My first year of grad school, I was the resident manager of a dorm. And it was a dorm that had graduate students and it had international students in it. And we, you know, all of us had graduate assistantships, but they were just like enough money to like sustain. And so I remember feeling like, wow, I'm really stretched thin with this graduate assistantship. But I couldn't believe how many of my friends who are international students were sending portions of that money home to their families to support their families. Like, and I was so grateful, like I didn't have to do that. But it just gave me a taste for like, whoa, you know, this is the kind of different financial situation you have come from.
I think it's definitely very common because some of my best friends, and one of my best friends is Hmong, and she's first generation Hmong, and her family expected her to go to pharmacy school, and that was because her older brother didn't, and now is living back home, and so it was very expected of her to go to like specifically pharmacy, and she's very gifted in the arts. She never has really liked science. And so she struggled with her parents for a really long time. And she recently just dropped out of pharmacy school to now go pursue a degree in graphic design. But it took until she was 22 to be finally like, I'm wasting your money. I'm doing terrible. I'm going to go pursue this because I'm good at it. And so, yeah, I think it's a high expectation, especially in different communities.
I know we have some exercise science majors in this class, but otherwise I think you're all psych majors. Have you all heard that from family? What are you going to do with a psychology degree? Well, how do you respond? I'm curious.
My response is just that I am going to go to grad school. I don't know what for yet, but just based off of personal experience right now, I'm about to graduate and I want to do seasonal work next year. And that was a big conversation with my family because they are so conventional and they wanted me to kind of go right into grad school. So it was a big deal for them to kind of go off the beaten path because they were worried I would not go back to grad school. But I had to explain to them, I will, it's just something that I'm feeling called to do, but they definitely are worried as I am a psych major about what I'm going to do with the degree.
Do you all know about Sean Bergman's workforce course? It's a 1-credit course. It's offered next semester. It's a 4,000 level selected topics. Consider it as you're thinking about your schedule for next semester. I helped design that course. And he's IO and he's teaching it. And from what I've heard in student feedback who have that course right now, they find it to be very valuable. And I think about it, where some of you might be going into the workforce with a bachelor's degree, and that's kind of what the course is geared towards. But then some of you, I mean, all of you are going to go into the workforce likely, unless you're just inherently rich, at some point, even if you go to graduate school, right? There's still going to be that transition. Yeah, so keep in mind that's a new selected topics that the department's offering that could be of help for some of you. At least having the confidence that even if you take a gap year, Sarah, as an example, you know, it could be really helpful finding a strategic position that's going to really benefit you in that gap year, as an example. Yeah.
I can say that I'm like intended like pre-med, and my family likes my degree only because I'm pre-med, and it's a very interesting take on that, and I don't fully agree with it. And my mom is actually a social worker, so she has her own misconceptions about psychology, because she's like, psychology is so like medical based, and I'm like, well, undergrad psychology is a bigger umbrella than that. But I definitely find that with my parents, and now like with COVID and whatnot, I'm definitely going to take gap years and probably do research. And I'm not sure if I want to go to medical school or just doctoral program, probably not psychology, but of some sorts, and probably within the medical field. But yeah, I can definitely see my family questions it a lot, but only accepts it because of like my future plans.
I personally found that my mom, I mean, she always supported me, but it felt like she liked my degree more when I decided to go to grad school and when I got into grad school. And I just find that really interesting because like, I'm going to get my master's. So like it's a step down from my previous goals of going to get my doctorate. But I just thought that it was really weird that she's so supportive now, like compared to what she was when I switched my major to psych in the first place.
There have even been politicians. There was one in Florida years ago, and I kind of latched onto this when I was doing some of my work and was designing that class, who have said the last thing we need are more psych degrees, meaning psych bachelor's degrees. But what's really interesting about that, and a lot of times psych majors don't know this, is that employers love you all because of all these skill sets that you have. And they're usually like skill sets of good communication skills, written and oral, you know, people, kind of that type of thing. They love that you know how to pull information, like, you know, pull down the science, pull the research, and use it to inform what you're doing in employment. Many psych majors have that social justice, you know, kind of morality that they carry with them. And in the workforce, that oftentimes translates into, if there's a problem, psych majors are bothered by it and they want to solve it. And employers love that because a lot of times psychology majors on the job figure out how to be more efficient in what they're doing, or how to keep people motivated so that they're enjoying what they're doing, and then they do more of that kind of thing. So what you all probably don't know is that employers love the psych majors. There just aren't jobs called psychologists out there, you know, looking for a bachelor's degree. You've got to find the right key terms, the kind of terms to search for. One key term is counselor, because counselor can mean bachelor's level, master's level, doctoral level, but just, you know, typing in like on ONET or some other type of career search engine, counselor, and it lands all kinds of different things. But I want you all to know that what your parents might not understand is the value of a psychology major. Employers get it. And then certainly professional programs get it, you know, law, clinical psych, experimental psych, counseling, social work, you know, those types of graduate programs very much like recruiting psych majors into their pipeline. Questions about that? I spent 2 years researching this and helping develop that course. And so, yeah, check out Dr. Bergman's selected topics. Some of you. Jama, I love tangents. We've gone on one. You want to bring us back?
Yeah, I can bring us back. So the next thing that I just wanted to show was the idea between don't judge a book by its cover and beauty is only skin deep. The reason why I put these on the same slide is I think they go very hand in hand, because like a lot of the things that they found were very similar between these two. And so among children, for the maximum don't judge a book by its cover, children saw that children who were more attractive had more social approval and probably a greater academic and developmental competence. With adults, more attractive adults and like who they perceived as more attractive, they rated them as having occupational competence, social appeal, interpersonal competence, and are better adjusted. A few other things that adults rated when looking at attractive versus least attractive adults, was that adults thought that they obtained like more attention, more reward, positive interaction, positive impression, and then they received more cooperation than like people who are less attractive. And then looking at like beauty is only skin deep, children looking at less attractive versus more attractive children, they thought the more attractive children were more popular, better adjusted, and had more intelligence / performance. And adults found very similar things with more attractive adults had more occupational success, more popular, more dating and sexual experience, better physical health, and higher esteem, a bit higher intelligence, and higher mental and physical health. And so these were just like some key points from these findings. And I know this is a lot on one slide, but I thought it was very useful to see beside each other because they definitely do go hand in hand. And the things that were found between children and adult participants were very similar when looking at less attractive versus more attractive people. And so one thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think we hit on a lot with like don't judge a book by its cover and beauty is only skin deep, even though we didn't specifically put a label on it. I think we talked a lot about it already. So one thing I wanted to ask was, how are these research results prevalent in our society? So thinking that people who are more attractive are more popular, better health, have more occupational competence, but like more intelligence, like all of that. How do you think that is relevant in our society and like is prevalent? So to get us started, like one thing that I definitely thought about was dating apps. Like dating apps obviously use these ideas of like first impressions, physical appearance, interacting with certain people versus other people. I think too, people who are famous, especially women, are oftentimes very attractive. I feel like the expectation on men is not as high. Like there's some men that we know who are very, very famous and who many of us would probably not say, oh, they're very attractive. Versus I feel like the expectation for both minorities and women, they are very attractive, in media, especially. Any thoughts on that?
Who's the actor that starred in Breaking Bad? I'm just blocking on his name. I hate when my brain doesn't work. He's a good example of that though, I think. Fantastic actor.
Bryan Cranston. I looked it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Katie, yeah, Bryan Cranston. I mean, he's a good example of, I think many of us would agree, not the most gorgeous man, right? But an amazing actor, plays amazing lead roles. He was in Malcolm in the Middle before Breaking Bad. Yeah. But yeah, we see female actors say that is really tough, and particularly hitting a certain age and really struggling at, like in late 30s, really struggling to find roles. Whereas men don't seem to have that age gap in those kinds of places. Where else does this play out? I'm curious about the dating apps. Tell me, and again, it's been a long time since I've been in that arena. So let's say you like make yourself, you filter or whatever in your picture on a dating app. Then what happens when you go on a date and actually meet that person in person? Or do people post like realistic pictures, or do they post like really special pictures and then what?
I think there are people that use like filters or kind of don't um be truthful, because like I have some guy friends that say like, oh, she catfished me or so and so, and I'm just like, well, I don't know your situation, but that could be there. Or some people, they put like good examples and pictures, stuff like that. So I don't know, it could be like 50-50, depends on who it is.
So variability, yeah. So Jamer presented data on the children, and I do remember researching that and writing that, and that was a painful section to write, you know, and that's why I kind of have all the effect sizes in there just to sort of show like, no, this really is powerful. How do you think this plays itself out in children?
I think with bullying, we see that a lot with kids, and it's very prevalent, and I feel like that plays a role for sure.
Do you think it plays itself out with teachers? Kind of the teacher's favorites, stuff like that?
I think too, kids with lower socioeconomic status, especially like they can't control that, but oftentimes in schools, especially that don't have like dress codes and stuff, there is a discrepancy between like how kids dress, and then I think that factors into how teachers and other children perceive them.
When I think back and I think about, again, the kind of pressure that I felt when I was growing up of like, don't leave the house a certain way, only leave the house a certain way kind of thing. My parents grew up in poverty, even to the point where, particularly on my mother's side, sometimes there was not like clean running water. She likes things very clean. I like things very clean because, it was sort of, she kind of had to fight that. She had to fight to be clean. And then I think some of the messages that me and my sister got were, don't leave the house unless you look like you're not coming from poverty, that you look like you've got it together, even though you might not. Can you see how some of that stuff gets transmitted through generations? Yeah. Anybody else kind of experience some of that?
I know that my mom grew up in a lot of poverty, and so she actually, I feel like, took like the opposite take with me, especially, is like she wanted to provide me with things to express myself, especially in like elementary school, and she did not care how I looked. She's like, it's up to you, you get to decide. I know daily, like I would come in and she's like, how many pigtails do you want? And sometimes I would say 6, and then I would walk into school with like 6 like ponytails. But she definitely, I think, grew up in poverty, and I think grew up with that mindset of like, you need to look a certain way so you don't get judged. And I think with us, she just wanted us to be ourselves. And so she really hammered that into us, which I'm really grateful for, because she tried to break the generational cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it.
So I went to a private elementary / middle school growing up, and I also have 3 other siblings. So I had a lot of my sisters like hand-me-downs, and granted, like we had a uniform at the school. So like, and I knew these kids, like we were all together for 10 years pretty much. So like we never really knew what it was like to have the freedom of like wearing whatever you wanted. But we did have certain days where we were allowed to wear like jeans or like just dress up for certain occasions. And I just remember like the one thing that we could wear anytime we wanted, like part of the uniform, were like whatever shoes you really wanted. And I just know like it's something so slight, but it was super stressful because like I didn't have new shoes all the time. Like I would just take my sister's like a lot of the time. So like it's kind of like what you said, like looking a certain way um was like associated with being more in the popular group or whatever. And like granted, like my class was like 20 people, so it was like really small. But it's just like one of those things, it's so interesting to see that. And I didn't really get the full taste of that until I got to high school because I ended up going to a public high school. So like I was not ready for that transition at all. But like I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has like had something like that.
I also went to like a private high school and like a private middle school, and I definitely felt pressure to have kind of like certain brands, especially like with girls, like they would all wear like the same like brand of shoes. And in middle school I had a uniform, but like in high school I could wear whatever I wanted. I mean, I had a dress code, but I definitely saw that and saw that girls like wore the same things, and kind of like if you didn't have like the it brand or like the it shoes, like you were kind of like thrown into the out group or whatever.
And isn't some of the uniforms to sort of like equalize that?
Yeah.
It's like you
It
don't
was
yeah
express yourself and decorate,
That's why like the shoes was like such a big deal, because like you had to wear the same thing, like belts, polos, khakis, whatever. But then like when it came to the shoes, it was like, oh, she's got the new Nike shoes kind of thing. It's like the smallest little things.
Do you like shoes now, Celeste? Is that a thing for you?
I actually don't care about shoes. I think I still wear the same ones like as long as I can.
Comfort. Go for comfort.
I actually find this conversation super interesting because I went to a public school that was very like upper middle class, but we didn't have a dress code. So you could kind of wear whatever you want and get away with it as long as it wasn't like too absurd or too revealing, or like wearing something super graphic on a t-shirt or something like that. Which I think definitely had its pros and cons. But I think one of the pros was people were a little less focused on like the very little things. People were definitely given like more creative freedom to dress how they wanted to. And so like, at least I know in high school, I wasn't paying attention to the shoes that someone was wearing unless they like pointed it out. And they were like, oh, look at these new shoes I got. So it's just, it's very like absurd to me to hear that like just the shoes like would matter so much, because I just grew up in a school that you didn't focus on that.
I also went to a public school, and so I went to my community is pretty rural, very rural, and pretty impoverished because of that. And so I feel like there wasn't a big emphasis on clothes and brands because none of us could really afford it. And so I feel like it was bigger on like a different type of popularity almost. And I felt like there was like obvious, especially in high school, obvious like groups. I feel like in middle school was like bigger on popularity, but then in high school, like it was just very distinct, like different groups, like the whole like jocks and theater kids and like band kids, like all of that was a much bigger deal than specifically clothes. Yeah, but I went to a private school for like one semester for health issues and stuff. And I definitely saw that in the fact that it was like big brands, like little things. And I think it was also a very different experience for me because there was a lot of kids whose family had a lot of money. And so like the emphasis was on very different things. And so it was a very interesting like mini social experience to see those different types of schoolings and how the kids and like people interacted.
One of the things I found interesting raising my sons in Boone, North Carolina, and you all know the fantastic mall that we have, right? If you've come from suburbia or Charlotte, one of the big cities, that have real malls. When they were younger, when they were teens, they found their own style and they differentiated and they wanted to pick out their own clothes because they kind of found a style. But growing up as boys, we had here in Boone, we used to have a Kmart, which is now our Publix. And then we got a Walmart, and then Walmart ran Kmart out eventually. So that's kind of what we had. And what I found interesting is I would buy my sons their clothes. They would wear their clothes. Every other kid in school, every other kid in sports were wearing the same clothes because they came from Kmart and Walmart here in Boone. But the nice thing that I felt like that gave my sons was they weren't materialistic. Like there wasn't that I need these, very special high cost clothes to look good kind of thing. And it even kind of translated into not being very materialistic when it came to like the latest, video games and things like that. There was something about Boone that kind of buffered a lot of that. And I think in good ways. Can't hear you, Sophie.
I'm okay.
Oh, there you are. There you are.
The green thing goes. But I think that's so interesting because my high school that I went to is located in like Southern Pines or Pinehurst. I don't know if any of you know where that is. But it is a very diverse high school. And so I don't live like in Pinehurst. I live far out in the country, but there's like 3 towns surrounding my high school. And so there's Pinehurst, which has all the like super rich people. Like there are a lot of famous people that, come and play golf in Pinehurst and like have houses there and stuff. And that's kind of like the culture there. And then in Southern Pines, it's like more the up and coming and has a lot of like military families and stuff because we're so close to Fort Bragg. And then in Aberdeen is a lot of like the low income families. And so our high school just had like a very diverse group. And so there were, some kids who were wearing, like Louis Vuitton and all that kind of stuff. And I was an athlete. And so I didn't really care too much, but I had a lot of friends who definitely like dressed up, and there was a stark difference that you could tell by what you wore. Looking at people's, you could tell their socioeconomic status by looking at their clothes. So it's like a very stark difference between Boone and, everyone wearing the same thing. I just thought that was, I think it's weird to me for like, that to happen because of how diverse my like high school experience was. But
something that I found really interesting, excuse me, I went to a middle school where we had to wear uniforms, and it was just the standard like black, red, white, even down to the shoes. But it seemed more on like the days where we could just wear whatever, that there was less bullying because nobody really cared about what we were wearing because we were all just trying to wear as much as possible so that, we could get the most out of the day. Whereas when we wore our uniforms, it was like everybody would pick out every little thing. Like, you're not wearing your apostle, so, like, you're not cool enough, that kind of thing. That's what I find really interesting.
So I'm hearing children and teens like to size one another up, right? That there was that kind of stuff going on, it sounds like, for a lot of you. Making those impressions, making those judgments. Yeah.
I think so. Okay, I just have one more thing to show to like close it out. Let me see. This is looking at kind of more the biological side of attraction and like also the evolutionary side. Cool. Can you guys hear it?
Anyone or anything that reproduces sexually is constantly thinking to itself, who am I gonna mate with? We spend a lot of time thinking about mate choice because passing on your genes early and often is how you win at being alive. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's the most important thing you will ever do if you do it. And due to its extreme importance, it is also very complicated, you may have noticed. Our general understanding of it comes from Charles Darwin, who proposed that some individuals get more action than others because of sexual selection. You've heard of it. One gender of a species consistently prefers mates with specific traits, so individuals with those traits pass their genes on more often and spread their genes and the traits throughout a population. Old Charlie was certainly on to something. Take a look at this peacock. Some would consider this overkill, but to the ladies, a big frothy rack of feathers shows that a dude is healthy and has good genes. So as a result of sexual selection, male peacocks have evolved to look like 1970s Las Vegas showgirls. Humans, like peacocks, have evolved to like some traits more than others, and these preferences date back to a time when those traits gave an individual huge survival advantages. So in most cases, beauty is actually a language that conveys information about health and fertility. But if you're thinking that it's all about boobs and big muscles, think harder. You know what really turns us on? Bilateral symmetry. Humans are attracted to people whose bodies and faces look the same on both sides. How am I doing? Anybody? Symmetrical imbalance can mean someone was exposed to some kind of stressor during early development that they weren't tough enough to deal with. Similarly, a low waist to hip ratio drives both dude and lady humans wild. Where fat is deposited on a body is determined by sex hormones, testosterone in men and estrogen in women. Women who produce the ideal amount of estrogen generally have waists that are about 70% the width of their hips. Same goes for men and testosterone. People with this ideal ratio are often less susceptible to cardiovascular disorders, cancer, diabetes, and women in this range also have less difficulty conceiving and giving birth. Now you might be wondering, why will an asymmetrical guy with an ideal waist-hip ratio make you feel kind of meh, but he's got your friend driving by his house 3 times a day? Well, one reason could be in our genes. Everybody gives off subtle chemical signals called pheromones, which give potential mates a clue to our genetic profiles. Crazy, right? Studies have shown that men and women are generally attracted to pheromones of individuals that are genetically similar to themselves, with one major exception. They prefer mates with a different kind of immune system gene called major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. The combo of 2 variations of the MHC gene helps a couple's offspring fight off disease better, and our pheromones basically tell mates which version of that gene we have. But even after you account for pheromones and symmetry and ratios, it's complicated, and people don't make rational decisions, so really don't bother with those hair plugs or that boob job. It's complicated, and yet so awesome. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow. In the comments, tell us what makes you attracted to a potential mate. Also, if you have any questions,
So that's just some information. Sorry, I was trying to get stop. That's just some like information on like some of the evolutionary stuff as well as some of the biological stuff like pheromones and HTC. I can't remember the exact acronym that drives attraction, but it definitely all interplays into fat talk, and at least the media partake on what women should look like, and which we'll get into in chapter 2. Yeah, anything, comments or questions on that?
We have survived evolutionary biology and psychology. Have you all learned some things? Or been able to make some connections between some things? Yeah, I think that's what I like about evolutionary biology, psychology. I do think it helps explain a lot of things and helps make connections between a lot of things. Anybody have any questions for Jama? All right, well, nice participation, everybody, and nice job, Jama. I appreciate it. Good to see everybody. See you next class.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.